Mrs. Ifeoma was a 50-year-old widow living in Lagos, Nigeria. She was a wealthy and respected woman, working in an oil and gas company. People admired her success and confidence, but deep inside, she felt lonely. Since her husband died years ago, she hadn't found love again. She missed being cared for and cherished. Her only child, Chinedu, was her pride and joy. Chinedu, a 27-year-old hardworking and cheerful man, was very close to his mother. He loved and respected her deeply, and they had a strong bond. Mrs. Ifeoma always said Chinedu reminded her of her late husband. Chinedu's best friend, Tobi, was 28 years old, handsome, charming, and funny. He and Chinedu had been friends for years, and Chinedu trusted him completely. Tobi often visited Mrs. Ifeoma's house, and she treated him like family. It was December, and the holiday season had begun. Chinedu invited Tobi to stay at their house, just like they did every year. Mrs. Ifeoma didn't mind, she had always liked Tobi. The first day Tobi arrived, Mrs. Ifeoma noticed something different about him. He wasn't just the funny, friendly young man she had known for years. That day, she saw how attractive he was, tall, well-dressed, and confident. For the first time in many years, she felt butterflies in her stomach. At first, she was confused. Why am I feeling this way about my son's best friend? She thought. She tried to ignore it, but every time she saw Tobi around the house, her feelings grew stronger. She started seeing him differently, not as her son's friend, but as a man she could love. Mrs. Ifeoma hadn't felt this way about anyone since her husband passed away. She was surprised by her emotions but couldn't stop thinking about Tobi. Tobi didn't notice Mrs. Ifeoma's feelings at first, but over time, he also started feeling something. He couldn't ignore how elegant and graceful she was. Mrs. Ifeoma wasn't just beautiful, she was smart and confident. He admired her strength and independence. But he was scared. How could I tell Chinedu that I have feelings for his mother? He thought. He knew Chinedu would never accept it. He felt guilty, but his feelings kept growing. One day, Tobi decided he couldn't keep it a secret anymore. He had to tell Chinedu the truth, even if it meant losing his best friend. One afternoon, Tobi sat next to Chinedu in the living room. "Bro, there's something I need to tell you," Tobi said, avoiding eye contact. Chinedu laughed, thinking it was a joke. "What is it? Did you break up with another girl again?" "No, it's serious," Tobi said firmly. "It's about your mom." Chinedu's smile disappeared. He stared at Tobi, confused. "What about my mom?" Tobi hesitated, then finally said, "I have feelings for her. I think I'm in love with her." Chinedu's face turned red with anger. "What did you just say?" he shouted, standing up. "I know it sounds bad, but I couldn't hide it anymore. I respect you, but I love her," Tobi said, trying to calm him down. Chinedu couldn't believe what he was hearing. He grabbed Tobi by the shirt. "You're joking, right? You want to date my mother?" "My mother? I'm not joking, Chinedu. I'm serious about her," Tobi said, pulling away. Without warning, Chinedu punched Tobi in the face. "You're a disgrace. How could you even think about this? You're supposed to be my friend." Tobi wiped the blood from his lip. "I'm sorry, but I can't help how I feel." Chinedu pointed at the door. "Get out of my house. And don't you dare come near my mother again. If you do, you'll regret it." Despite Chinedu's warning, Mrs. Ifeoma and Tobi couldn't stay away from each other. They began meeting in secret. One evening, as they sat in a private restaurant, Mrs. Ifeoma asked nervously, "Tobi, are you sure about this?" "Yes. I've never been more sure of anything," Tobi replied, holding her hand. "You're everything I've been looking for, And I don't care what anyone thinks. Mrs. Ifeoma smiled. For the first time in years, she felt loved and appreciated. Over time, they grew closer. They spent time together, going on dates and talking about the future. One evening, as they walked along the beach, Tobi said, "I want to be with you forever. I don't care if Chinedu hates me for it. I'll prove to him that I'm serious." "I hope he understands one day," Mrs. Ifeoma said, leaning on his shoulder. One night, Tobi arrived at Mrs. Ifeoma's house with a bouquet of roses. He was dressed in a suit and looked nervous. "Why are you so dressed up?" Mrs. Ifeoma asked, laughing. "I have something important to say," Tobi said, getting down on one knee. Mrs. Ifeoma gasped. "Tobi, what are you doing?" He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a diamond ring. "Ifeoma, you've changed my life. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Mrs. Ifeoma's eyes. She nodded and said, "Yes. Yes, I'll marry you." They hugged, and Tobi slipped the ring onto her finger. A few weeks later, Mrs. Ifeoma had another surprise. As they sat in the living room, she held Tobi's hand. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "What is it?" Tobi asked. "I'm pregnant." Tobi's eyes widened. "Pregnant? Are you sure?" "Yes, I took a test." "You're going to be a father," she said, smiling nervously. Tobi smiled and hugged her. "This is amazing news. We are going to be a family." The wedding and the final betrayal. Chinedu had been avoiding Tobi and his mother since the fight. But one day, he saw something online that made his blood boil. It was a photo of his mother wearing an engagement ring, standing next to Tobi. The caption read, "Forever and always. Can't wait to spend my life with you." Furious, Chinedu stormed into his mother's house. "Mom, what is this nonsense I'm seeing online?" he shouted, throwing his phone on the table. "I was going to tell you," Mrs. Ifeoma sighed. "Tobi and I are getting married." Chinedu clenched his fist. "You've already made your choice. Don't expect me to support this madness." The wedding day arrived. The hall was beautifully decorated. Guests filled the seats. Tobi stood at the altar, looking confident. Chinedu sat outside in his car, staring at the gun in his hands. His heart pounded. "I want them," he muttered. As the wedding began, Chinedu entered the hall. When the officiant asked, "Does anyone object?" Chinedu stood up. "I object." The hall fell silent. Then, he pulled out the gun. Tobi collapsed to the ground. Mrs. Ifeoma screamed. As the police arrested Chinedu, he whispered, "I didn't want it to end like this."